This is the third video in a series of 4 videos on the CoreconLink and sync preferences for QuickBooks Online. In the first 2 videos, we covered the settings in the QuickBooks side and in the second in the Corecon side. In this training video, we're going to cover how to link the two together and to determine where and how data is going to flow into QuickBooks Online. It is important for your accounting staff to review the CoreconLink sync preferences, since this will determine how information flows from Corecon to QuickBooks Online. If you think of the CoreconLink as a bridge between the two programs, as it crosses the bridge, where will that information go? In other terms, data mapping between two software. In addition, the sync preferences will determine which service items and in turn which chart of account lines will be affected by certain transactions. Before you begin, remember that only the security role called Administrator and the other called Financial Administrator that are set up for you as defaults in Corecon when you purchase the subscription, they're the only 2 security roles that can access and manage the CoreconLink to QuickBooks Online. The first time you sit down to do this, remember that you should be logged in as one of the administrators in Corecon and log into your QuickBooks Online as administrator as well. If you've followed all the steps up to this point, you should be able to see on your main Corecon menu the CoreconLink menu option at the bottom. We'll click that. You're going to receive requests. Do you want to try out the new CoreconLink? We're going to go ahead and click OK. And then it asks, do you wish to open the new CoreconLink in a new tab? I'm also going to click OK. So now my Corecon V8 is open in one tab, my CoreconLink is open in the other. Once you make it to the CoreconLink for QuickBooks Online tab, you'll notice that some of the options you'll see in these tabs are covered in the 4th video in this series. To set up the sync preferences, simply select that option. We're going to work on each of these tabs from left to right. The first one is the contact management. The company sync options allow information to flow in both directions. QuickBooks Online does manage a lot less of the company information than Corecon does. Entering new companies in the future, we recommend that you do that on the Corecon side and let that export to QuickBooks. The options on this setting are to use the last modified entity as the master. That means if you've updated the address on the Corecon side, it'll prompt you to update the information on the QuickBooks side. This applies to vendor companies, suppliers, subcontractors, as well as customers and project owner companies. Again, just the company information. If you update the information on the QuickBooks side, you'll then later be prompted to and asked if you want to update the information on the Corecon side. Corecon recommends that you use the first option, but you do have options as well to allow Corecon to update QuickBooks, which basically means that changes made in Corecon are pushed to QuickBooks. You also have the option to do the opposite. If information's updated in QuickBooks, push it to Corecon. Those are defaults. Again, Corecon recommends the first one. The next one is the same in that it'll push information both directions. And again, QuickBooks maintains a lot less information. For the most part, Corecon is going to be able to update the employee address and phone number. You have the same options here. Corecon recommends that you use the last modified entity as the master. Next, we're going to go to the Accounts Payable tab. The first thing you see is a default credit card. The default credit card account that you're selecting is coming from your QuickBooks chart of accounts. The same is true for the default banking account. Next, we'll go to the AP Sales Tax item preferences. Depending on which version of QuickBooks Online you're using, this step may not appear. But the purpose of this is to identify tax on material purchases and to ensure that that sales tax is charged to cost of goods sold, not posted to sales tax payable. The item we talked about in the first training video, we called it sales tax AP. Next is the job cost code linking preferences. In the first two videos, we discussed a decision that should be made before you get to this step, and that is which job cost code link option to use. You do have an option to choose one. The one I've selected first of all is the one based on the cost resource type, and those are materials, labor, equipment, subcontract, other. In this case, we're going to choose the default AP item, which is a clearing item, CCUNC or Corecon Unclassified. The job cost code link option is the one that includes the MLESO. And for each of the line items that appears, you'll select those service items set up in the first training video. Materials to materials, labor to labor, equipment to equipment, subcontract, and other. If you're using another method, for example, the AutoLink AP item based on job cost code, you won't need to add any other information. It knows to look first for the job cost code. If it does not find that, it'll look for the division cost code from the master cost code list. If it doesn't find either, it'll end up in the CCUNC, or the clearing item. The other one that's popular is the Link AP item based on the project classification. It's going to look into a classification type. The one that I used was called Profit Center in the example, and then match it to service items that are identified the same way as the items as they appear in Corecon's global settings. You'd need to create a service item for the construction group, the service group, the design group, match those up individually. If that's the case, you're also going to want a revenue account and a cost of goods sold account, one each for each of these three. So you would end up with 6 GL accounts on your chart of accounts. You could also choose to link everything to a single JCC item. And when you do that, then you switch the default AP item to whatever you called it. In this case, you only need 2 GL accounts, one revenue, one income, and also one cost of goods sold. I'm going to use the MLESO method. You also have the option to set the class linking. That does need to be turned on in QuickBooks before you can select this. But if you do, you can use some similar methods that you had above in the job cost linking. I chose MLESO, so I might want to choose the project classification. This gives me an extra layer of detail. And then you can select classes that were set up in the global settings on the QuickBooks side. If this were set to job cost codes, which is the AutoLink AP item based on job cost code exact match only, then this one might be a good one to switch to the MLESO method. Just remember that this class linking does not affect which GL accounts that the cost will export to. It's only an additional reporting feature in QuickBooks Online, and these would need to be set up as classes in that list in QuickBooks Global Settings. I'm going to use Do Not Use Classes. Next is the billing type references. Corecon is going to assume that if you put export to bills, that the credit side of the entry will always be accounts payable. Again, the debit would be cost of goods sold, the credit would be accounts payable. So I'm going to leave my no type as export to bills. I also have one called AP vendor bill, also leaving that as export to bills. The next one down is my corporate credit card Amex. And when I choose that, I want to set the export to credit card purchase and then identify the credit card liability account. Again, when these transactions are exported to QuickBooks, the debit will be cost of goods sold, the credit would be in a credit card liability account. The Visa will also be a credit card purchase, so we'll switch that to the matching credit card liability account. There's also a corporate debit card. A debit card would come directly out of your checking, so we're going to check that as export check purchase and select the bank account that applies. An employee reimbursement is usually paid on a miscellaneous check or a bank check, So we're going to also set that to export as a check purchase and switch the bank account to whichever account you use to make employee reimbursements. The next item down is the bill memo field. You have an option to set the billable status as billable or non-billable on the QuickBooks side to match whatever you used on the Corecon side. That is optional. The memo option for this means that you're going to have a brief description that's associated with the transaction. This description will usually show up on your vendor check stubs as well. On the stub, it usually has a bill date, a bill number, a brief description, and the amount being paid. So you may see this description or format there as well. Next, we're going down to miscellaneous expense payment types. Again, miscellaneous expenses is where Corecon prefers that you record corporate credit card transactions, corporate debit card transactions, and employee reimbursements. So even though I already have set these up as bill types, I can also do that here under miscellaneous expenses. So the first one is a corporate credit card. So I'm going to switch that to export to credit card purchase and select the credit card liability account. The next one, same credit card purchase, credit card liability. The corporate debit card is export to check purchase, and we're selecting the bank account. An employee per diem reimbursement would also show up on a check, but that also might be cash. We'll just select check purchase and the bank account. Same for the employee reimbursement. It would be issued on the bank check, so the bank account would be also designated here. We also have a memo field that's associated with miscellaneous expenses and plays a similar role. On a check stub for reimbursement to an employee, there would be a brief description. You can choose whichever one you prefer. The sub-invoice retainage, if you opt to use retainage, there's one item that we talked about in the first video to set up. So we're just going to select the retainage service item for both the default AP retainage and the AP retainage that was billed. That means that the retainage on a sub-invoice is going to end up as a other current liability. The next one down is a sub-invoice memo field. Again, it may show up on both the transaction and on the check stub. You have an option to choose from. Then we're going to click Save. And we'll go over to Accounts Receivable. Accounts Receivable, you have also similar options for job cost code linking. You have job cost codes for a single item, just like we did with the accounts payable. We have also an AR item to a specific project classification, one for the based on the job cost code exact match only. There's also one I would not recommend, which is the job cost code description exact match only. And you also have one by the project number. I'm going to use the job cost code matching. You also have the option to set classes just like we did with the accounts payable. Remember that when you select a class link preference, that the classes do need to be set up in QuickBooks before you can match those in CoreconLink to QuickBooks. Next option is the retainage or holdback. The option to show retainage or not is selected. If it is, then you'll want to select the item that we talked about in the first training video so that the retainage or holdback receivable is posted to an other current asset. Next item down is a memo field that's associated with a prime invoice transaction once it's exported to QuickBooks. And then we'll switch to time tracking. Under time tracking, you do have the option to not export labor time cards. Again, when you do, it is hours only, not rates or burden. However, it does allocate according to your option here. The default service item would be CCUNC. If you're selecting a single service item, you also have the same project classification, job cost code exact match only. That's the job cost code number. Skipping over the job cost code description, and you also have the project number. I'm going to use the job cost code exact match only. Then I'm going to go to tax codes. If you already have tax codes set up in your QuickBooks Online, Corecon will give you an option to import these and set them up for you in Corecon the same way you have them set up in QuickBooks. When you do, then you'll just want to go down the right-hand side, remembering that what's on the left is Corecon and what's on the right is what you're going to see in QuickBooks. And then just match those up one by one. When you're done, click Save and close. The options you see on the Sync tab are in the 4th training video in this series. Remember that the CoreconLink to QuickBooks Online also has its own knowledge base, which you can access here, or you can also go back and access it through Corecon V8.